Is your head spinning this time of year as you think about all of the trips coming up and all the work you have to get done?
Yes, sir. There couldn't be a better example of my current state of mind other than spinning all over the place. To know that I'm leaving my house in 20 days to head for Wyoming, I can't explain my enthusiasm yet anxiety at the same time. Trying hard to get ahead of things this year after kind of my first year of full on North American whitetail, gun dog, and wildfowl, and feel like I have a pretty good idea where I need to be come August 29th or 30th, and I'm getting there, but a little anxious about it. So
Are we talking Wyoming whitetails?
I am, yeah. Wyoming whitetails headed back to the northeast corner of the state. That state is full of opportunity for the whitetail hunter, and I went out and did my first whitetail hunt last year in Wyoming, and it was a hoot, man. I hope to make that a part of my annual hunting roster, I guess you could say, as we move forward here.
Is that a September 1 opener?
It is, yep, September 1, which I think is a Monday or Tuesday this year. I'm forgetting. I don't have my calendar right in front of me, but going to go out a couple days early, put the glass to work, and try to locate a buck in velvet. I am yet to have taken a whitetail in velvet. Kind of hopeful that I can get it done there this year. But I'll take a hardhorn whitetail as well. My feelings will not be hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess on September 1 most of those bucks will be velvet at least for a few days when you get out there.
Yep. Yeah. Last year we were there for 6 days, and we saw several velvet bucks that even held onto their velvet all the way through the end of the hunt. The first 6 days, of September there. And then we saw several. They were about 50-50. About half of them had dropped. We watched some drop their velvet, in days as we were there too. So just a neat time of year to hunt the whitetail for sure.
Yeah, that's that draw of the velvet whitetail. A lot of people are catching that bug now, and there's a few states that offer up that chance. But really,
Mm-hmm.
if you want a good chance, you better find a state with a September 1 opener. I mean, you could probably. I've had a few little bucks here in Minnesota and Wisconsin when we have when that season kind of opens the earliest it will, which might be like the 12th, 13th of September. Once in a while you see a
Yep.
scrapper, but you don't see a big one very
Yeah.
often. And you see that when you get out there especially if you have a September 1 opener, the amount of bucks that are hard antler they go up every day as you're out there.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. We've got a September 15th opener here in Missouri, and that actually took place while I was in high school, and when we first transitioned into it. And a lot of me and my buddies here at home always were hopeful of catching that one good velvet buck still hanging in there. But the amount of times I've seen a velvet buck on stand on September 15th here in the state of Missouri has been far and few between. And like you said, usually it's a little guy running around, not the guy that you're targeting. So
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen, the one thing that wildlife photographers are really keyed into this, but hunters, we don't witness it very much. But when you get out there that time of year and you're on like a bachelor group of velvet bucks, you think like, oh, maybe he'll keep his velvet for a couple days. And I've watched him go in and bed in the morning and come back and hunted the same group at night. And some of those bucks are completely hard antlered that were
mhm.
velvet in the morning. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
how quickly it goes, but it goes within hours.
Within hours, yeah, yeah. Like I said out there, we watched a good mainframe eight that dropped his velvet. We saw him the night before with velvet. Next morning, we saw him coming off the alfalfa field, and they were gone. And he had red antlers. You can still see the blood stain on his antlers. So and some stuff hanging. So it can happen pretty quick. I don't know if they all happen that quick, but it can happen pretty darn quick.
In my experience, I've killed, I don't know, 3 or 4 in velvet, and I've killed a couple that I saw the day before that were velvet that turned hard antlered, and it
Yep.
seems like they just go fast. And so it's one of those things. People will say, well, I want to go to this state or this state because I can kill a velvet antlered buck. And really, you should
Mhm.
look at it like I'm going to hunt super early season bucks, and the
Yep.
velvet thing might be a kicker, but you might not get there.
Right, right. Well, I hope that one of these days I have the time and opportunity to sit down and really target a good velvet opportunity. But man, it really for me at this point, I'm just itching. I've been waiting since in this last year. I got to hunt all the way up into February. I guess past spring. Got a nice opportunity to go hunt with some really nice folks down at in Alabama at the Pushmataha Plantation, which was just a really cool deer hunting experience. Just, I guess, you could say steeped with just the hunting tradition that exists there in the Southeast. And it was an awesome opportunity. But I guess that's the shortest amount of time I've ever had to go from deer season closed to deer season open. But like any of us, man, I'm just hungry, and I'm hungry to get my stick and string out this year and go a little wild with it. I had a really tough season last year with the bow and arrow, and so many close calls. For some reason, just could never close the deal. And it was quite a deal. But I'm hungry this year going into the 2020 season. I'm ready to have several arrows that are tainted red and be skinning deer. If it's September 1st or 2nd or 3rd or October 1st, 2nd or 3rd or November 1st, 2nd or 3rd, I'm ready, man.
Yeah. You know why it got so difficult for you, don't you?
I do know why it got difficult for me.
Can you tell the listeners?
Yeah, a couple of different reasons. Well, one, I took it upon myself to do kind of the full out public land challenge with a cameraman over my shoulder. And while I've had some success myself on public ground, things change a little bit when you're trying to make TV and doing it. And I'm not using that as a scapegoat at all, because, at the end of the day, it just didn't fill a tag. And that's all there is to it. But that's part of going out on public ground, man. Those are deer that tend to be a little bit more in tune because they get a little bit more of an education in most cases. And, the first bit of pressure they get at times, they can turn and find the boundary of that piece of public ground that you're hunting pretty quickly. And we even in Wyoming last year where it first started, we had 3 or 4 close calls and it took it right up to the end of the hunt on a really nice mainframe 8-pointer on public ground right down in between some oak flats and pine flats where those deer were bedding and staging, going out across a low depression in the terrain there feeding down to a coulee that took them to the alfalfa field, which was their destination. And it just didn't work out, but I learned a lot. And I know going into this season, I'm a better hunter because of it. And sometimes, you got to have a season like that to really get your attention and cause you to focus up when you're out there in the woods and doing your homework, before you hit the woods, when you're sitting in your office or in your recliner at night, looking at your base map or whatever technology you might be using for a mapping resource. But yeah, that was definitely part of it.
Yeah. It's, nobody's going to feel sorry for you, but I know exactly what, I know exactly what that is. When you sort of make that transition, filming on public land just sucks in general. It's just hard, which is why you so rarely see it. But It's also just the motivation, the process, everything changes when it's like, okay, I need to get something killed because I need a product out of the end of this. And it changes the whole dynamic of it. And it's it becomes so much harder to do. And I think that's where, like when you look at the hunting public guys, I think part of their success is they're like, we're going to 15 states, like it's gonna happen. Yep. And so, and they're good hunters and they're working hard, but I think they kind of have the luxury of knowing I don't need to be home for 2.5 months. And, they're not filling a 13 show schedule or a 26 show schedule. So they have a different kind of, there's a different kind of thing hanging over their head, and they have a platform where they can show lots of screw ups and they can show the things going wrong, and they don't have a time limit. They don't have to fill 21 minutes a show or whatever. And so it just, it lends itself better to that. But it is just generally a tough pursuit. And to put that pressure on yourself to be like, okay, a whole bunch of people are counting on me to put something on the ground here and, showing up on public land to kill is tough enough. And then you might get a cameraman who's just not the hang and hunt type of guy.
You'll have that, man. And we work with some great videographers and, and at the same time, you have some folks that haven't been put into that. You might work with a videographer that 1, doesn't hunt or deer hunt, and 2, has never even stepped foot to try and film a hunt or hunt on public ground. And there's different elements. You start talking about filming permits and you talk about all the regulations that come with it. You don't have the opportunity to go screw a tree arm bracket into your tree in a lot of states because you can't deface the vegetation. So instead he's shouldering a camera the whole time, or maybe you're hunting from the ground and you're hunting, man-made ground blinds, which can be very effective when put into the right place. And to get that guy to sit on his knees and let his feet fall asleep underneath of him for an hour when the right deer come cruising through. They're just elements that, I had very ambitious goals out of the gate, and I learned a lot of things, not only about hunting whitetail deer, but, videoing the hunt of a whitetail deer, from the videographer's standpoint. So it was a lesson. And you brought up the guys from Southeast Iowa there, that the hunting public that are very successful in what they do. And, I kudos to them. I enjoy watching their program, and they are guys that really go out and they have definitely figured it out. They put some seasons in, and I haven't thrown in the towel yet. I can tell you I'm backing off of my public land hunts a little bit this year for the TV show. But I am going to come back at it next year. I've had some different opportunities that were put in front of me this year that I wasn't expecting either. So that's going to kind of reduce the number of public land hunts from a tag draw standpoint. I drew a couple tags I wasn't expecting, and that's definitely changed my schedule a little bit. But man, I like challenges, and I'll be back. But to keep my job, I probably need to build a little more consistency into my schedule as well. So,
I want to talk about what you brought up earlier about, sitting on the ground versus sitting in a tree. Cause I know last year when you were out there on that early hunt, you were doing a lot of ground hunting, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And so when you take Western whitetails, the beautiful thing about them is they don't look up very much. And so they're in my experience, they're so much easier to hunt from a tree. But you've got a cameraman with you, and in a lot of those river bottom situations, there aren't a ton of good trees there. And so a lot of times those situations lend themselves to an easier style of sitting on the ground, but you're dealing with deer who are looking for lions and other stuff, danger on the ground. And so
on the ground,
it would be a benefit to be in a tree. It's just so much harder to make happen in some of those Western situations.
Yeah, for sure. So that particular spot I mentioned earlier, we had a pine flat up on the ridge. We had an oak flat staging area just below it. Then we had a depression in kind of like a low spot that was draining across this flat. And it was the shortest point from their staging area, or the cover of their staging area, to the cover of terrain change, where you got down into a break that kicked down into the Belle Fourche River, and where the alfalfa flat was down in the bottom. And that particular piece of ground, you couldn't hunt the agricultural fields. That's the way that the rules were established on that product. So we had to be above that ag field, somewhere between the pine flats and the river that lined it. And basically we found that those deer were all funneling in that low depression of the landscape. And to get to that point, before I go any further there, let me go back to where they were bedded and the staging area. There were a few trees that might have worked, and I mean might. And I've made some pretty unreasonable trees work in the past with the right kind of equipment, the right hang and hunt situation or arsenal. But man, they were bedding so close to the edge of that staging area, I was really afraid to get up on that staging or up on that pine flat where they were bedding, because one, they had the advantage of their sight and elevation, where they could look down and see everything that we were doing coming into it. So it was real tough to get into in the middle of the day when you were trying to get back in there and sit in the evening. So what we were doing is we were coming, those 200 yards across that open flat where there's kind of a depression in the landscape, and they were using that funneling through. We were trying to get on the downside of it, right on the edge of the breaks, where they were kicking down into that break and using it, that cover, that security landscape, to get down to the alfalfa field. And we were trying to hide behind what sage bushes were there, or a little bit of cattails. There was a little spot that was holding just a little water. I mean, no bigger than, the lane or the paint on a basketball court. You're laying on a basketball court, but it just a little puddle of water, and it had some cattails, and we tried to get hid right up in them. But like you said, man, those deer, we were below the flat of that transition area, and the first thing that you would see out of that deer was its antlers. And the first advantage they had on you was sight, again, because they had elevation. So they'd pop over, and just like you said, they're looking for predators. They're looking for that next mountain lion that's going to pounce them as they step into that area, that coyote. We managed to cover up pretty good, really. And what ended up being our tough position was we just weren't, what ended up being our hurdles, we just weren't close enough to those deer as they were coming out of their bedding and staging areas to capitalize on them prior to legal shooting time. And I can tell you, 2 different nights, one night, literally 3 minutes after legal shooting light ended, or legal shooting time ended, and then the next night 8 minutes, and we had the deer, the bachelor group, drop right into our laps at 32 yards both nights. And so we have some great video, beautiful skyline scenery of a bachelor group of bucks, and the viewer is probably going to sit there and go, "Why isn't he shooting them?" Well, it's past legal shooting time. So unfortunate, but that's a part of it. And I'll tell you, man, I learned a couple different things about hunting the ground and Western whitetails later in the season that had I known in September, we would have tried. And the first one was use of a decoy. And I never, ever would have thought of using a decoy in the early season. But I was watching, we did a throwback hunt of Greg Miller's. It was actually the first deer that he ever killed on North American Whitetail, and I believe it was his first deer killed on North American Whitetail. It was a Wyoming hunt on a velvet deer, and we did that this spring as a rerun type opportunity, a throwback episode, and he was hunting with a decoy, and he put it up under his tree. And what you'll notice with those deer out there is those deer tend to follow other deer. So they'll come out of their staging area, they'll look around, they'll notify, or they'll identify another deer and where they're headed, and they follow that deer almost to the T at times. And what Greg was using was he was using that particular fact about the deer activity against them. So he put a decoy out, and those bachelor groups of bucks were coming right to that decoy. And 2 different nights he had deer come into that decoy. First night he couldn't get a shot. Second night he capitalized. There's 2 different sits. I think he used the morning sit and an evening sit. But either way, so I found that out. Had I known that, I definitely would have thrown a decoy out because it would have sped the process up of them getting across that flat and then coming to our location where we had a good setup, rather than trying to pick somewhere in that 200-yard span where they were dumping into the break and playing the wind right. So we really could have used that to our advantage. The other thing I would have done is I would have used a hay bale blind. And I don't know if you've had any experience with the hay bale blind and Western deer. Traditionally, when it comes to ground blinds, Tony, and you and I've talked about this a couple of times, is you have to brush them in. You absolutely have to brush them in, or you have to put them in a spot where those deer can get used to it being part of their landscape. You don't have that opportunity when you're hunting public ground and you're only out there for a week. You don't have, a couple of weeks to go put that blind out and let them get used to it, or 3 weeks to let them get used to it. So you're trying to brush it in. Well, here we are in the open of a sage flat, dumping into a break, and you really don't have a whole lot of cover to try and brush something in. You end up being a lump in the middle of the landscape all of a sudden. So those hay bale blinds, well, they're going from a pine flat to an oak flat to the break, right down to a big alfalfa field filled with hay bales. So hay bales are pretty commonplace for them out there, and they get moved all the time, right? Because they're mowing that hay, they're raking the hay, they're making the bales. And when I say they, I mean the farmer. And then the farmer's going to move that bale from one side of the field to the other, maybe to his hay lot. So I learned in South Dakota a little later in the year that you literally can put those things out and the deer will walk right up to them, because a new hay bale is a commonplace for them out there. So that would have been something else that I would have tried to use.